you, Ellen. Ellen Baker gets all the credit for organizing this event and taking good care of our speaker, who I must add is indomitable. He's been with us since 8 o'clock this morning, talking with our girls, our faculty, our administrative management team, and we're only beginning to scratch the surface of his research, his wisdom and experience, and passion for the subject. So I want to tell you a little bit about Dr. Leonard Sax. He's an internationally sought-after speaker. He's an author of 4 books on child and adolescent development, including Girls on the Edge and Boys Adrift. He had a long-time primary medical care practice for children and adults in Montgomery County, Maryland, and he currently practices medicine in Chester County, Pennsylvania. Dr. Sax has spoken on child and adolescent development not only in the United States, but also in Australia, Canada, England, Germany, Italy, Mexico, Spain, and Switzerland. He's visited more than 380 schools to share his insights and research. He's appeared on the Today Show, CNN, NPR, PBS, the BBC, and many other international news outlets. Dr. Sax is a graduate of MIT with an MD and PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. And tonight, he will be addressing the reality and concern of parents across the country on the impact of social media on developing children and teens. So we'd like to give a warm round of applause and welcome to Dr. Leonard Sax.
Well, thank you. I certainly want to thank Dr. Boland, Ellen Baker, and everybody at the school for giving me this chance to meet with the girls today, which was a very lively conversation, to meet with the teachers this afternoon, and to meet with you now. I have prepared a handout for you. The handout is basically the notes I would take at this presentation to save you the trouble of taking notes. It's also an annotated bibliography. I'm going to cite a lot of research over the next 60, 90 minutes or so. If you'd like to read the primary sources, which I encourage you to do, you'll find them in the handout. The handout is my name, leonardsax.com/montrose.pdf. It is case sensitive, it is all lowercase. It's online now, but you don't need it now. And I would encourage you not to pull it up now. It's not designed for a phone, it's designed for a laptop or a larger screen. Yikes. And it's going to be very hard to read on a phone. And you don't really need to follow along, and it's confusing to try. The main point of the handout is a week or two from tonight, when you think to yourself, you know, there was something useful in that talk, but I can't remember what it was. My hope is that by looking at the handout, it'll jog your memory. And I'll show you this link again, leonardsax.com/montrose.pdf. So I want to begin with a quiz question. Can we turn the lights on? We're going to leave them on for a little while. Oh, all right. I'm going to begin with a quiz question. In just a moment, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand to indicate your answer. The question is, based on a longitudinal cohort study in which researchers followed kids for many years, recruited kids early in childhood, and then followed them right into adolescence and adulthood. When the kids were 12 years old, they interviewed every kid and obtained for each of these kids a quantitative measure. To what extent is this kid open to new ideas? Worked with the school to get a combined measure of grade point average and IQ. A validated measure of emotional stability for each kid. Friendliness and agreeableness. And self-control. And then they followed each of these kids for 20 more years. So these kids aren't 12 years old anymore, they're now 32 years old. And at 32 years of age, you again meet with this individual using a variety of resources to determine health and wealth and happiness, life satisfaction for each of these individuals who are no longer children, they're now 32 years old. One of these parameters, measured when the child is 12 years old, powerfully and accurately predicts health and wealth and happiness in that individual 20 years down the road. But only one of these 5 parameters. The other 4 of the parameters shown here predict one or none of the 3 principal outcomes. The 3 principal outcomes being health, wealth, and happiness. But one of these 5 predicts health and wealth and happiness and predicts it very powerfully. I'd like to see a show of hands. Who thinks that that one key parameter is openness to new ideas? Don't look at your neighbor, they don't know. Who thinks it's a combined measure of grade point average and IQ? Who thinks it is emotional stability? Who thinks it is friendliness and agreeableness? And who thinks it is self-control? I'm going to keep you in suspense. If you leave early, you won't get the answer. But if you stick around, you will get the answer, and I think you'll get a lot more besides. I think this information is useful to all of us as parents. So I want to go back about 50 years. 50 years ago, researchers in the United States studying immigrants to the United States found that the children of immigrants who did not speak English at home, who come from overseas, were at risk, were at greater risk of becoming anxious or depressed. And so a scholarly consensus arose that when new immigrants arrive in this country from overseas and they don't speak English at home, we want to get them speaking English at home. We want to get the parents fluent in English and get the kids speaking English because that improved outcomes. It wasn't a matter of cultural imperialism, it was empirical finding. That if you got kids speaking English, they would do better. The first link in your handout is a scholarly monograph edited by Dr. Milton Gordon and published by Oxford University Press 50-some years ago, in which Dr. Gordon pulled together this scholarly research showing that kids benefit when they begin speaking English at home. Kids benefit by becoming American, by assimilating into American culture. Now, I want to rush to the disclaimer. I'm not suggesting that 1965 were the good old days. In 1965, our country was much more racist and sexist than it is today. There are no good old days. But each era has its challenges. And I think we can understand our era better by contrasting it with an earlier era. 50 years ago, becoming American improved outcomes for kids. It was an empirical finding. Learning to speak English, assimilating into American culture. That's no longer true. In fact, today the reverse is true. To understand what scholars mean when they use the phrase the immigrant paradox, it's helpful to imagine 2 households. Let's imagine 2 adjacent households right here. The households are very similar in some respects. Both households consist of a mother, father, teenage son, and teenage daughter. Same ages in both households. The occupations of the parents are the same in both households, and the household income is the same in both households. The main difference between the 2 households is that in one household, mother, father, son, and daughter were born and raised in the United States, and they speak English at home. In the adjacent household, mother, father, son, and daughter were born and raised in Bangalore, India. They do not speak English at home. They speak Gujarati in the home. Now, in which household are we more likely to find that the teenage daughter is binge drinking, that cutting herself with razor blades, or has been diagnosed with an eating disorder, or has been diagnosed with anxiety or depression. On each of those parameters, it is now many times more likely that the American girl has those problems compared to the girl who just arrived from India. In which household are we more likely to find that the boy says school is a stupid waste of time, or has been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, or has been arrested for street racing? On each of those parameters, it is many times more likely that the American boy has those problems compared to the boy who just arrived from India. So I'm a medical doctor, as you heard. Doctors use the phrase dose-response effect. Dose-response effect in reference to a toxin means the more you're exposed to that toxin, the more likely you are to suffer an adverse effect. That boy and that girl from India, the first week they're here, the first month they're here, they're very unlikely to develop any of the problems I just mentioned. But if they stay here, and especially if they begin speaking English at home as a marker of assimilation into American culture, their risk increases. And after a few years, their risk will approach the risk of the boy and girl who have been raised here. When scholars first began to document this new finding about 15 years ago, they were surprised because many of these scholars were themselves educated in the 80s and 90s, knew about the earlier research of Dr. Gordon and others, and they were surprised to find that being a child of an immigrant, not speaking English, now protects you from bad outcomes. And then if you start speaking English, that doesn't improve outcomes as it did 50 years ago, that worsens outcomes. They were so surprised they coined the phrase the immigrant paradox, because to these scholars it seemed paradoxical that being American is now a major risk factor. That being an immigrant who does not speak English now protects you. And the only conclusion that they can draw is that American popular culture is now toxic to children and teenagers. The more kids are exposed to it, the more likely they are to suffer an adverse outcome. And I say that not in a derogatory or pejorative sense, but merely in a descriptive sense. It is a robust empirical finding that the more kids are immersed in contemporary American culture, the more likely they are to suffer bad outcomes like anxiety, depression, binge drinking, and so forth. So what happened? Why is becoming American now a major risk factor for anxiety, depression, drug and alcohol use, disengagement from school, and many other bad outcomes? Well, I think we can begin to get a handle on that question by talking with comparative anthropologists. And in writing my book, Boys Adrift, I spoke with a number of comparative anthropologists like Gilbert Hurt, and especially David Gilmore at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. And I said to Dr. Gilmore, talk to me about cultures that last, cultures that have been around for thousands of years. Do they have anything in common? If you ask that question in terms of what they eat, or what they're prohibited from eating, or how they dress, or what their religious beliefs are, the answer is no. Let's consider the Navajo, the native people of southwestern United States, and let's contrast them with Orthodox Jews. These are two cultures we know a lot about. They are both still with us. They've been around for thousands of years, and they could not be more different on the parameters I just mentioned, how they dress, what they eat, what their religious beliefs are. They could not be more different. That's why I choose those two, because they're so different. But there is one thing they share. One thing that the anthropologists tell us all enduring cultures share, and that is strong bonds of respect across generations. So that's a photograph of Kinaldap. If you know only a little about Kinaldap, and someone says, well, what's Kinaldap? You might say, well, it's a rite of passage. When a Navajo girl has her first menstrual period, she stays in the home of her grandmother for 4 days and 4 nights And during those 4 days and nights, all of her adult female relatives call on her aunts, her cousins, and she demonstrates to them that she has indeed mastered the arts and crafts of Kenneldon. The arts and crafts that are taught by Navajo women to Navajo girls, and only to girls, and not to boys. And that's true enough as far as it goes, but it's more than a rite of passage. It's a process that's been going on typically for 2, 3, 4 years by the time this girl gets her menstrual period. And incidentally, it's not primarily about mother-daughter. It's the grandmothers and the women of the grandmother's generation who take the lead in teaching this girl these traditional arts and crafts. And that's a common but not universal finding among enduring cultures, that the grandmothers, the grandparents play a big role. You have a community of women for girls and a community of men for boys. Now everybody knows about bar mitzvah, but if you're not connected to someone in the Orthodox Jewish community, you may not know that in the Orthodox community, every aspect of religious life is single sex. The girls and women worship here, there's a barrier, the boys and men worship there. Every Saturday morning, as you may know, in an Orthodox synagogue, you read a particular portion from the 5 books of Moses. When you finish that cycle, you've concluded the last chapter of Deuteronomy, and now you're going to start over with Genesis 1:1. That night, all the men, and only the men, stay up traditionally dusk till dawn. You have older men with younger men with boys. A community of men teaches each boy, this is what it means to be a Jewish man. That's not that boy's father, it's another man in the synagogue. A community of women teaches each girl, this is what it means to be a Jewish woman. Now, what that Jewish girl is being taught is completely different from what the Navajo girl was being taught. There's almost no point of overlap in what they are taught. The content is completely different, but the process is the same. In every enduring culture, anthropologists find, you have a community of women for girls and a community of men for boys with very close bonds across generations. And we used to do that. By we, I mean North American Anglophone secular. Anglophone means English speaking. Secular means not Amish, not Mennonite, not Hutterite. This is not nostalgia, it's not a guess. We have good researchers, notably Robert Putnam at Harvard, who spent the last 20 years leading an army of graduate students across the United States, conducting more than 200,000 structured interviews, documenting that 50 years ago, you could go into almost any town or neighborhood in the United States and you'd find a sewing circle, organized not by kin relation, but by geographic proximity. Meaning that the women and girls in the sewing circle weren't related to one another, they just happened to live on the same block. He documents not only formal but also informal associations. So he documents that 50 years ago, you could travel around just about any neighborhood in the United States on a Saturday afternoon, and you'd see a bunch of guys working under the hood of a car. And he got documentation on who were those guys. They were older men, younger men, and teenage boys together. You can drive around an American neighborhood on a Saturday afternoon today, nowadays, and you might see 2 old geezers working to the hood of their 65 Corvette, but the teenage boys are not with them. The teenage boys are more likely to be indoors playing a video game with other boys. The bonds across generations have been broken. Bowling used to be more popular in the United States. But more importantly, from Dr. Putnam's perspective, it was done differently. 50 years ago, most of the bowling in the United States was in bowling leagues. Tuesday night might be the women's night, Thursday night was the men's night. And so again, Dr. Putnam and his students dig up who was in the bowling league in Lake Forest, Illinois 50 years ago. Let's see, we got this 54-year-old woman, 41-year-old woman, 27-year-old woman, 17-year-old girl, and 12-year-old girl. Kids in the United States still go bowling, but they go bowling alone, the title of Dr. Putnam's best-known book. Meaning not literally alone, but instead of a 17-year-old girl going bowling with a community of women, she's going bowling with a bunch of 17-year-olds, girls and boys mixed together. which as far as Dr. Putnam is concerned, is bowling alone. When Dr. Putnam uses the term community, he means bonds across generations. Those bonds have been broken. So that's one big change in American culture over the last 50 years, the breaking of bonds across generations. Another big change we learned from the work of James Coleman, sociologist at Johns Hopkins, who 50 years ago, again, led a team of graduate students across the United States interviewing American teenagers and asking them questions in structured interviews and recording their answers. One of the questions Dr. Coleman liked to ask American teenagers was, if all your friends wanted you to join a particular club, but one of your parents did not approve, would you still join? And 50 years ago, most American teens, the majority, told Dr. Coleman no. They would not join a club. Even if all their friends wanted them to join, they wouldn't join the club if one of their parents did not approve. Because the good opinion of both their parents mattered much more than the combined opinion of all their friends. Between 2007 and 2015, I asked an updated version of Dr. Coleman's question. Posed an updated version of Dr. Coleman's question to kids I met with across the United States. I asked them, if all your friends wanted you to sign up for a particular social media site, would you consult your parents first? The most common answer I got from American kids was not yes, was not no, was laughter. Kids would burst out laughing. One girl said, my parents would probably think Ask FM is some kind of radio station. Why would I ask them? Now, to be sure, many American kids will say they love their parents, but the opinion of their peers matters more. That's a big change. Why does it matter? It matters because most cultures have been characterized by strong attachment across generations, and the kids have been looking to the grown-ups. But today, American kids increasingly are looking to the marketplace and attached to other peers. Primary attachment is to same-age peers, researchers find. Why does it matter? It matters because good parents offer unconditional attachment, but peers can't. Good parents nurture, but peers do not. Good parents sacrifice for the good of their children, but peers rarely do so for same-age friends. When the parent-child relationship is the most important relationship in the life of the child, matters more than all the others, then that child can relax. Suppose my daughter were to say to me, I hate you. I never want to talk to you ever again as long as I live. Well, there would be some consequences. Her mother and I would discuss and decide what privileges she would lose and for how long. But nothing fundamental is going to change. She will not lose her place in our house. We won't stop loving her. There's nothing that she could do or say that would make us stop loving her. So she can relax. No matter what she does, we will still love her. She knows that. But suppose she says those same words to a friend at school. I hate you. I never want to talk to you ever again as long as I live. Well, that friendship is over. Or it is at least badly damaged. Peer relations are contingent and ephemeral, researchers find. You want to see an American girl have a meltdown? Take her phone from her without warning. And she will totally freak out. Because she'll be like, Vanessa doesn't know I don't have my phone. What happens if she texts me and I don't answer? She's going to think I'm ignoring her. She's going to think I don't like her. And you can go from being the most popular girl to being the odd girl out in one day. In 5 minutes. And they've seen it happen. So they're glued to their phones. The prioritizing of same-age peer relations over the parent-child relation is another huge change in American culture over the past 50 years. That's two. Got another one. Most cultures have taught respect for parents. And that's a very robust finding. Strong bonds of respect across generations, the anthropologist tells us. And that was true of American culture 50 years ago. Even if the parents themselves were lousy parents who never said a word about it, didn't matter. If the kids spoke English at home, they were immersed in a culture which did teach it. You look at the most popular TV shows in the United States 50 years ago, Talking about shows like Father Knows Best, My Three Sons, The Andrew Griffith Show. The lead adult characters, the parents in those shows, are consistently reliable, competent, knowledgeable, caring, thoughtful, and productive, and kind. Not anymore. Longest running television comedy on American television, The Simpsons. The father is a bum, the son's an idiot. The wife varies. Sometimes she's clever, more often she's not. The only one of the four major leads is the daughter, Lisa. But I'm not picking on The Simpsons. I actually have great regard for the people who write for The Simpsons. I think they have real insight into what's happened in American culture. In one episode of The Simpsons, you get to see inside Homer Simpson's brain. Homer Simpson's brain has three major drives: sleep, donuts, and beer. There's real insight there. If you imagine an American cartoon 50 years ago depicting the brain of an American man, it probably would have shown the entire brain as a sex drive. That was the stereotype of American men 50 years ago. Not anymore. Now it's about sleep, donuts, and beer. The testosterone level and sperm count of American men has dropped by more than half over the past 60 years. That's a pretty substantial change. Again, I'm not picking on The Simpsons. In writing my book, The Collapse of Parenting, I reviewed the 150 most popular television shows in the United States. Not one of them consistently or even occasionally portrays a parent as reliable, knowledgeable, competent, productive. Modern Family. The straight dad is an idiot who does hysterically stupid things. We laugh at him. His children, especially his oldest daughter, are consistently wiser and more insightful than dad is. They have nothing to learn from their parents. The Disney Channel. If you don't watch the Disney Channel, you might think, oh, Disney's family friendly. Wrong. Not anymore. The Disney Channel is a major vector of the culture of disrespect. Shows like Dog with a Blog, shown here, the father, supposedly a school psychologist, knows nothing about the behavior or motivation of kids. The talking dog is wiser and more insightful than dad is. Liv and Maddie, another Disney Channel show. The two girls are as different as they can be. The one thing that they agree on is that their mother, also supposedly a school psychologist, knows nothing about what kids want or what kids need, and the girls roll their eyes in disgust at the hilariously stupid suggestions made by mom. She is the butt of the joke. If I say be a gentleman to a boy, if you were to say that to a boy 40 years ago, he would know what you meant, even if his parents had never used the word, because he spoke English. Because he was immersed in a culture that taught it. Because he watched movies with stars like Paul Newman, Sidney Poitier, Gary Cooper. He learned that a gentleman is knowledgeable, is kind, is courteous, defends the rights of the weak, because the culture taught him. I was at Wabash College, Crawfordsville, Indiana, speaking to the freshmen. And I asked them, what's a gentleman? Anyone care to venture a definition? And I called on a young man, and he said, a gentleman is someone who goes to gentlemen's clubs and watches girls take their clothes off. I said, okay, that was really funny. Now, can anyone offer a more serious answer? And they can't. They're grasping at straws. Another boy said, a gentleman is someone who wears a three-piece suit. It's all about surface appearance. But I don't blame these boys. How should they know? They have received no instruction. You're not born knowing this. If you were to say to a girl a generation ago, be a lady, she knew what that meant, even if her parents never mentioned it. Because if she spoke English, she was immersed in the culture. of Grace Kelly, of Audrey Hepburn, of Jackie Kennedy. But today the popular culture provides very little guidance. The marketplace has changed. The American marketplace used to be a much healthier place for children. That's Sam Cooke. 50 years ago, Sam Cooke had a #1 hit song in this country. He sang, "Don't know much about history." He sang, "Now I don't claim to be an A student, but I'm trying to be, because maybe by being an A student, baby, I can win your love for me." He goes on to mention French, geometry, and trigonometry as subjects in which he's going to try harder to earn an A rather than a B, because he believes that by being an A student, he will raise his status in the eyes of the pretty girl. 50 years ago, the culture of people who spoke English at home was the culture of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Simon and Garfunkel. Not anymore. Today, the contemporary culture of kids who speak English at home is the culture of Eminem, Nicki Minaj, Justin Bieber, Miley Cyrus, Akon. So looking around this room, I see a number of elderly people. By elderly, I mean over 40. And I find that people over 40 don't know who Akon is, so let me tell you. Akon is a singer, very popular with kids in the United States, black and white. Less so with Spanish-speaking kids, but very popular with kids who speak English at home. He chose the name Akon to remind you of his claim. He claims to be a con. He claims to be a convicted felon. He claims to have served 2 years for Grand Theft Auto in the Georgia State Penitentiary. A claim which turns out to be false. When he got to be famous, the reporters looked it up and they found that, well, he was arrested once on a charge of possession of 1 item of stolen property, but the charges were quickly dismissed. He's never been convicted of anything, and he's never been inside a penitentiary except to perform. American culture has changed from a culture in which young men wanted you to think they were scholars working hard to get an A instead of a B, to a culture in which some young men would like you to think they're convicted felons or gang members, even if they are not. That's a significant change. So the first chapter of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, is titled The Culture of Disrespect, by which I mean the culture in which American kids who speak English at home are now immersed. When I talk about the culture of disrespect, I don't mean only that American popular culture now teaches kids to be disrespectful to adults, although it does. I mean also that American popular culture now teaches kids to be disrespectful to one another. It is common to find American kids wearing t-shirts that say things like, "Do I look like I care?" Or "I'm out of your league," or "You look better on Facebook," or "You look like I need another drink," or "I need another drink, you're still ugly," or "I'm not shy, I just don't like you." You will not find these t-shirts outside of North America. I was speaking to students at schools in Scotland, in Edinburgh, in Perthshire, and in Stirling. And I showed them some of these t-shirts, and they were baffled. Why would you go out into the public wearing a t-shirt that says to the whole world, "I don't like you"? To kids in Scotland, that doesn't seem funny, it just seems rude. But American kids immersed in the culture of disrespect find this sort of thing funny. I was in Sydney, Australia, and I did see a teenager wearing a t-shirt, not this exact t-shirt, but the same words. It said, "I'm not shy, I just don't like you." And I went up to him, it turned out he was an American kid on vacation. The 3 issues we have addressed so far: the breaking of bonds across generations, the prioritizing of same-age peer relations over the parent-child relationship, and the culture of disrespect. Those 3 big changes affect girls and boys equally. But there are at least 2 more big changes. And those two changes have a gender aspect to them. One change is contemporary video games, and that affects boys more than girls. And in the interest of time, we're going to skip that tonight. Our focus tonight is on girls. Another big change has to do with social media. And this has happened really quickly. And I think it's worth one slide to remind ourselves how quickly this all happened. 13 years ago, Facebook was just launching at Harvard and nowhere else. 7 years ago, Instagram was just launching. According to Nielsen, more than half of American 12-year-old girls are now on Instagram. It's only been around for 7 years. To understand why that matters, and why it matters for girls more than boys, it's helpful to contrast a girl living today with a girl living in ancient times, by which I mean 1997, 20 years ago. So let's imagine a girl in 1997. It's the evening. She's writing in her diary, by which I mean she's writing with a pen in a bound volume of blank pages. She's writing about who she likes, who she doesn't like, the kind of girl she most admires, the kind of woman she hopes to become. She might write 5 pages in an evening. She's not going to show that to anybody. If she was a younger brother, she might keep it under lock and key. But she's doing some very important work. She's figuring out, who am I? Who do I want to become? What do I really want? The great American psychologist, Dr. Abraham Maslow, said that figuring out what you really want is not trivial and not easy. He believed that many adults never really figure it out. And they're miserable because they're working hard at jobs they don't like in pursuit of goals that are not meaningful to them. So this girl writing her 5 pages in her diary, she's doing some important work. Earlier today, I met with girls at this school, and I asked them, who's on Instagram? Most of the hands went up. Who's on Facebook? Very few hands. Who's on Snapchat? Almost all the hands. Who here keeps a diary? Actually, I was really quite impressed. More girls at this school keep a diary proportionately than you will typically find. The typical finding in most schools, not at this school, is that none of the girls are keeping a diary. They're all on social media. At this school, that is less true. But even at this school, there are many more girls on social media than there are keeping a diary. And that's a universal finding now in the United States. The social media have crowded out the diary for the majority of girls. Because everybody's busy. And there's not enough time in the day to do both. And for most girls, the social media matters more because other kids are watching. What's the difference between writing in a diary and posting it on Instagram? So I'll ask, and a girl might answer, Instagram is public and diary is private. Bingo. Instagram is public and diary is private. When researchers look at how American kids are using social media, they don't find any 5-page essays about what I really want out of life. They just don't. What they find are lots of photos. That's true for girls, that's true for boys. American kids are posting photos on social media, not essays. Well then, Mike Stefano and his colleagues wonder who's posting more, girls or boys? Well, girls are posting more. How much more? 50% more, 80% more? No, it's 500% more. Girls post 5 times as many photos as the boys do. And the photos are different. Boy and a girl both go to the football game. And they both take pictures at the football game. But the boy is taking a picture of the game, or the pretty cheerleader at the game. The girl's turning the phone on herself. And she's taking 100 selfies at the game. And then that evening, she's going through the 100 selfies and finding 2 or 3 where she's laughing and the kids around her are laughing. And that's what she posts on her Instagram. Here I am at the game, had a great time. Madison goes to the party, takes 100 pictures at the party, comes home, finds 2 or 3 where she's laughing and the kids around her laughing. That's what she posts on her Instagram. Here I'm at the party, but a blast. She is not living, she is performing. The difference between the diary and Instagram is the difference between living and performing. Diary is something you do for yourself, to figure out who you are. That's living. Social media, as used by American teens, is a performance. There's nothing wrong with a performance. A performance is a show that you put on to entertain or amuse other people, and there is nothing wrong with that, as long as you realize that the performance has to come to an end. When you take off your mask and resume your real life. My concern, listening to American girls, is that for many of them, they're trapped in what I call the cyber bubble. 24/7 texting and social media, and the performance never ends. And it is exhausting, and it is draining. These girls are hyper-connected to other girls, but disconnected from themselves. Disconnected from themselves. So researchers are finding that the more time a girl spends on social media, the more likely the girl is to become depressed. Here's one of these longitudinal cohort studies. So you recruit a bunch of teens and follow them for at least a year, and you find over time that the more time this teen is spending looking at other kids' Instagram, or looking to see how many likes they got on their own Instagram, the more likely the teen is to become depressed. And that is true for boys. But it's much more true for girls. It's a much bigger effect for girls than it is for boys. How come? I met with Dr. Kathy Charles, at her office at Napier University. Different group of kids, different data set, but the same result. The more time girls spend on social media, the more likely girls are to become depressed. But in Dr. Charles' data, this was almost not at all true for boys. It was a huge effect for girls and a very small effect for boys, and she didn't know why. When I met with Dr. Charles, she could not explain the gender effect in her own data. So she was very interested when I shared with her research from other investigators showing that girls are very ready to believe that other girls are having more fun than they are. That other girls' lives are more interesting than their own life is. This turns out to be not at all true for boys. It turns out that boys greatly overestimate how interesting their own life is. And girls use social media differently than boys do. So Vanessa gets a puppy, and it's a really cute puppy, and she takes 200 pictures of her puppy and posts 9 or 10 of the cutest pictures on Instagram. But I have some very sad news. Vanessa's puppy got loose, ran out in the street, got run over by a truck. Vanessa's puppy is dead. But she does not post a photo of the dead dog on her Instagram. Boys do. It wouldn't be at all unusual for an American boy to post a photo of the mangled corpse of his dog on his Instagram. The boy and the girl both get sick, they both throw up. The boy posts a photo of his own vomit on his Instagram. Girls never do that. Now imagine a girl, 14, 15, 16, 17 years of age, sitting in her bedroom, looking at all the other girls' Instagram. There's Emily at the football game, she's having a great time. There's Madison at the party, she's having a blast. There's Vanessa with her new puppy and a cute. I'm just sitting there not doing anything. My life sucks. The more time a girl spends on Instagram, the more likely she is to become depressed. It's a much bigger effect for girls than it is for boys, and you now understand 3 mechanisms driving that gender difference. One is that the girl is more invested. If you don't like Jacob's photo of the pretty cheerleader at the football game, he doesn't care. But if you don't like Emily's photo of Emily, she's going to take that more personally. And boys post a wider range of their lived experience. This boy looking at Jacob's vomit or Brett's dead dog is less likely to want to be Brett or Jacob. And the boy greatly overestimates how interesting his own life is to begin with. So boys are, to some extent, insulated, protected from the toxic effects of social media. Girls are more vulnerable. Boys are more vulnerable to the toxic effects of video games and more likely to become addicted to video games. But that is not our topic tonight. Now, if a grown-up were sitting with that girl, a grown-up could explain, look, everybody's life is a mix of happy and sad, of success and disappointment. And that's true for those other girls just as much as it's true for you. And that's not a new finding, that's not a new insight, that everybody's life is a mix of happy and sad. And for most human beings who've ever lived, more sad than happy, more disappointment than success. So Paul, in his second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 6, verse 10, says, we have reason to be sorrowful, yet we're always rejoicing. The same man writing to the Romans, chapter 7, says, this world is subject to frustration. And yet the same man commands the Philippians to rejoice continually. Well, how are you supposed to do that? How are you supposed to rejoice continually if you have reason to be sorrowful and the world is condemned to frustration? I have been a medical doctor for 31 years and a PhD psychologist. And I have come to the conclusion that how you answer that question is the first step on the road to being a mature adult. You will experience disappointment. You will watch a loved one die. And then you will die. And that's true for every one of us here. Given that fact, how can you choose to walk through life joyfully? That's the first question. But this girl will never answer that question. She will not take that first step on the road to maturity. Because she still thinks all the other girls are having a great time. She thinks she's the only one who is bored, frustrated, lonely, disappointed. Researchers have been asking American teenagers the exact same questions about depressive symptoms going back to 1991. Questions like, are you hopeful about the future or are you hopeless? Do you think you'd be better off dead? Do you ever have crying spells? Boys are the dark line, girls are the lighter line. Researchers have been asking representative samples of American teenagers across the country the same question since 1991, screening for depressive symptoms. The boys' graph is basically noise around a mean. There is no statistically significant trend for the boys from 1991 to 2015. Nor was there for the girls from 1991 through 2010. But then in 2010, something happened. And the girls went, kaboom! The rate of depressive symptoms among American girls has soared over the past 7 years and shows very little taper in that trend line. It is rising right now. Why? Researchers have looked at every possible explanation. Is it too much homework? Is it the economy, unemployment rate, race relations? They have entertained and pursued every hypothesis, and the only hypothesis that fits the fact is social media. The researchers conclude that social media, such as Instagram, is driving the explosion in depression among girls. What can be done about it? Regarding social media, you first have to understand that most 13-year-olds are not masters of time management. So in one study, they asked this girl, this 13-year-old girl, how much were you on Instagram last night? She said, 40 minutes. It was actually over 2 hours. I don't think she was lying. I think she lost track of time. She was having fun. This is your job. And the good news is there's plenty of apps out there that make this job easy for you. I've listed them in your handout, apps like NetMany Mobile, My Mobile Watchdog. I have no affiliation with the companies that make these apps. But they make it very easy. You can limit how much time your daughter spends on social media. I'm not suggesting you prohibit social media. I understand that for many American girls, Instagram is now a major mechanism by which girls communicate with one another. But 3 hours is too much. Way too much. 20 minutes, I assert, based on the evidence, is sufficient time for her to log on, get her messages, respond, and log off. And you can configure the app so that once she's on for 20 minutes, she will be logged off whether she wants to or not. I find some parents who are skeptical of these apps. One parent said to me, "Oh, come on, my daughter's just going to Google the phrase, how do I get around parental controls on NetNanny?" Well, I've done a great many presentations across Silicon Valley. I actually met with some of the people who work for NetNanny, and they told me they have full-time employees whose job is to Google the phrase, "How do I get around parental controls on NetNanny?" And if they find that any kid has actually found a hole, they patch it, usually within hours, and your app will update. These apps work. Be very clear with your kids. Say, look, my parents insisted on knowing where I was at all times. I have to know where you are at all times, except now it's not out there, it's online. I will know every website you visit and what you do there. It's part of my job. Many girls are going to bed with their phone switched on. And then at 2 in the morning, your daughter's getting a text. OMG, Justin and Emily just broke up. This is really big news. We'll have to talk about this. And she's up for an hour in the middle of the night exchanging text messages. You know, some of the issues we're addressing this evening are not easy to fix. This one's real easy to fix. At 9 o'clock at night, you take the device, you turn it off, and you put it in the charger, which stays in the parent's bedroom. She can have it back tomorrow morning. Look, the rules of good parenting have not changed in 20 years. 20 years ago, a teenage girl could not accept a phone call at 2 in the morning because the phone would ring. And the parents would not allow it. Because they knew it's more important for a kid to get a good night's sleep than to be up for an hour in the middle of the night exchanging gossip. That was true 20 years ago. It's just as true today. The only thing that has changed is the technology. It's now very easy for her to accept that text message because the phone never rang. It buzzed. She has it on vibrate mode. And she's not talking, she's texting. But just because it's easy doesn't mean it should happen. This is your job. Now, when you get home this evening, and you inform your daughter that you attended a workshop by Dr. Leonard Sax, and Dr. Sax recommends that you take her phone every night at 9 o'clock the latest, turn it off, and put it in the charger, which will stay in the parent's bedroom. Your daughter may not applaud. Your daughter may protest. She may say, but I use it as my alarm clock. Let her know they still make actual alarm clocks. You can go to the store and buy one, they don't cost much. And now she gets really upset. She says, but what if there's an emergency? Remind her that you still have a house phone, a landline, in the parent's bedroom. And if there's a true emergency, her friend is welcome to call the house phone, and you, the parent, will pick up. And you, the parent, will decide whether this emergency warrants waking her up at 2 in the morning. It probably doesn't. It can probably wait. This has to be your job. It is not reasonable to put this burden in the lap of a 13-year-old or a 16-year-old. What's she supposed to say tomorrow in school when her friend says, hey, I texted you last night at midnight. Why didn't you answer? You're supposed to say, well, researchers have found that sleep deprivation. Come on, that's ridiculous. You have to allow her to say, hey, my evil parents take my phone every night at 9. They won't have it back till the next morning. This is your job. No devices in the bedroom. That's not just my opinion. Those are the official guidelines of the American Academy of Pediatrics. You'll find a link to the full text of the AAP guidelines in your handout, along with a text of a contract template prepared by the AAP for you and your daughter to discuss and to sign and to post on the refrigerator about when she's allowed to use her phone, what are the limits on social media. The American Academy recommends no unsupervised use of the internet. They say that no child or teenager, no teenager under 18 should have any expectation of privacy. The device should be in a public space. You know, and some parents will say to me, hey, you know, my school requires my daughter to do her homework online, and she's up till midnight and doing her homework. Get the device out of the bedroom. Bring it down to the kitchen. She can do her homework in the kitchen, and you'll find the homework's done by 9 o'clock. She wasn't lying. She didn't realize how much time she was spending on Instagram and shopping sites. No unsupervised use of the internet. That's the AAP guideline, and I think it is wise. It is certainly evidence-based. Scholars define sexting as sending or receiving an obscene photo. They define obscene as the nipple of the female breast is exposed or the male or female genitalia are exposed. Sexting per se is unusual among American teens. But what some scholars are calling not quite sexting has become very common. Not quite sexting means a girl is sending a provocative photo via Snapchat or posting it on Instagram. Every study conducted in the last 4 years have found that at least half, at least 50% of American teenage girls are now engaging in this kind of activity. New York Magazine devoted an entire issue to it. That's not quite sexting. That is not an obscene photo. The nipple is not exposed, the genitalia are not exposed. This is becoming very common. But some parents push back. One parent said during the Q&A at another school, said, Dr. Sax, you said not quite sexting is not obscene. She's not going to get arrested. It's not pornography. Why are you being so puritanical? That's the word that parent used. Dr. Sax, why are you being so puritanical? Look, this girl is presenting herself as an object for the arousal and amusement of boys. Scholars who study this behavior call it self-objectification. And they find that girls who engage in this kind of activity are much more likely to agree with statements like, how you look is way more important than what kind of person you are. They are much more likely to become anxious, less likely to be academically engaged. So in my own medical practice, a girl I knew well was asked by another girl who I don't know. The girl I don't know said, hey, how about I take some pictures of you taking your clothes off, you take some pictures of me taking my clothes off, and we'll send them to our boyfriends. What's the girl I know supposed to say? If she says no, the other girl might say, what's your problem? Are you a prude? You're still in kindergarten? Well, what the girl I know actually did say, she said, I can't do that because my parents have installed my mobile watchdog on my phone. Every photo I take goes immediately to my mom's phone and to her laptop before I even do anything with it. Go ahead, try it out. And she handed the phone to her friend. And the friend took a picture and called mom at work. And the friend said, hey, Mr. Patrick, we just took a picture. Did you see it? And mom's looking at the phone, yeah, flowers in a vase. Gardenias? Okay, thanks, bye. And the girl who had proposed the striptease said, wow, that's amazing. I wish my parents cared about me that much. They have no idea what I do with my phone. And the striptease did not happen. Now, at a presentation at another school, During the Q&A, a parent said, I don't understand why the striptease didn't happen. They could still have done it with the other girl's phone. Well, in your handout, you will find links to 2 studies of actual sexting, in which researchers interviewed American kids who were engaged in explicit sexting, taking obscene photos of themselves and sending them to their friends. And the researchers asked each girl and each boy, why are you doing this? And the most common answer the boy gives is he's doing it because he really enjoys doing it. It's common to find a 16-year-old boy who really enjoys taking a photo of his own erect penis and sending it to a 15-year-old girl. And furthermore, the 16-year-old boy is absolutely convinced that the 15-year-old girl will be excited and aroused to receive it. He doesn't know that the 15-year-old girl is very likely going to be disgusted and repulsed to have this on her phone. He doesn't know because he's a boy. He's got a long way to go. But then the researcher asks the girl, why are you doing this? And the most common answer the girl gives is some variation on, well, I wish I didn't have to. And the researcher says, what do you mean you wish you didn't have to? You don't have to. No one's holding a gun to your head and making you do this. And the girl says, yeah, but at this school, if you're a cool kid, that's just what you do. That's what all the cool girls do. You need to give your daughter an excuse to say no. I think the reason the striptease did not happen is because neither girl really wanted to do it. And the fact that one of the girls had this app on their phone gave both girls an excuse not to. So I visited a leading independent school, co-ed school, very well regarded, endowment north of $100 million. Very fine school. A 12-year-old girl had a 14-year-old boyfriend at the school. He asked her to send him some pictures. Nothing raunchy. He just wanted to see her pull off her blouse and skirt to reveal her bra and panties. So she went into her bedroom, closed the door, locked the door, and did as he had asked. Took some pictures as she took off her blouse and skirt. And sent them to the boy using Snapchat. Snapchat claims that you can send a photo using Snapchat with, say, a 5-second self-destruct. And after 5 seconds, the photos will vanish from the recipient's phone. And if the recipient tries to save the photos using a screenshot, you, the sender, will be notified. She believed Snapchat's claim. Snapchat knows that claim to be false. They know that there are dozens of free apps out there that allow you to save photos without the sender being notified. But she didn't know that. She sent him these photos. Of course, he had one of those apps installed. He saved all the photos. School administrators later determined he probably did not intend for anyone else to see the photos. But he was at a party, and his phone was in his hand. He set his phone down to grab some chips and talk to some friends. He is backed to his phone. Another boy wandered over, saw the phone, got to the phone before the 60-second lockout, so the phone was unlocked, saw the gallery, clicked on the gallery, found this girl's photos, forwarded each of the photos to his own phone, and then put the phone down exactly where he had found it. First boy didn't know anything had happened. Second boy then posted all the photos on his own Instagram. Within 3 days, everybody at the school had seen them. Boys this girl didn't even know were coming up to her and saying, hey Emily, how about you put on a striptease for us? She had been invited to a 3-day girls-only ski weekend. The girl whose parents were hosting the weekend, paying for the bus to take the girls to the lodge, paying for the rooms at the lodge, paying for the lift tickets. The girl whose parents were paying for it all called her up and said, you know, I really hate to make this call, but my mom is totally freaking out because all the other girls' moms are calling my mom and saying, if you're going to be there, they won't let their daughter go, because now they think there's some kind of bad influence. So I have to uninvite you. I'm really sorry. I have to uninvite you. This girl collapsed. Hysterical crying, refusing to go to school, saying her life was over, that the photos would always be out there, that she wanted to die, started cutting herself with razor blades. The parents took her to the doctor. The doctor prescribed Lexapro 10 milligram and counseling. That accomplished nothing. So now you have a 12-year-old girl with depression, not responding to medication and counseling, who wants to die. Who's at fault? The girl, her boyfriend, the other boy, and other kids. The parents are at fault. Look, this is a very grown-up device. With this device, I can take a photo, and once I send that photo, I have no control over what happens. That's a very grown-up functionality. To put such a device in the hands of a 12-year-old, it's like putting a 12-year-old behind the wheel of a sports car with no driver ed. If you're going to put such a device in the hands of a child, then you, the parent, are responsible for every photo they take and what happens to it. So I wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, sharing this story and making very specific recommendations based on the evidence. At what age is it appropriate for a child to have a smartphone? By which I mean a phone that can take a photo and send a photo. Certainly no child under 13 should possess such a phone. Most 13-year-olds are not ready for it. But if you're going to give a smartphone to a teenager, you must install on the phone an app like NetNanny Mobile or My Mobile Watchdog, and explain to your child, I will see every photo you take as soon as you take it. And if you don't want me to see it, don't take it. If you lose it, if I see any inappropriate photo, you lose the device indefinitely. Or don't give your kid a phone. And parents will say, that's totally unrealistic. Look, my daughter's doing all these activities after school. What happens if her ride doesn't show up? There aren't any P phones out there anymore. I don't want her going up to a stranger asking to borrow their phone. All right, I get that. I'm the father of a daughter. That's not an argument for a smartphone. That's an argument for a dumb phone. By a dumb phone, I mean a phone that can make a phone call and receive a phone call, and that's all it can do. You don't know about them because they're not marketed to you. They're marketed to the elderly. My father-in-law turns 82 later this month. Here's his phone. It has large keys, large display. You don't need 3G or 4G, these things work everywhere. And he charges about once every other month. The battery lasts forever. This takes care of any safety concern. If your daughter needs to reach you, she can reach you with one of these. You can give her one of these. But do not give her a smartphone. And if you're going to give her a smartphone, you must install an app like NetNanny Mobile, My Mobile Watchdog, and let her know you will see every photo she takes. And some parents push back. One parent said, look, I respect my daughter's privacy. I don't want to violate my daughter's privacy. If she doesn't want me to see her photos, I'm fine with that. I don't want to see her photos if she doesn't want me to see them. And I said to that mother, look, the most important thing you must teach your daughter or your son is that there is no such thing as privacy to any photo that you share electronically, with a phone or on a, quote, secure website. But I could see that Mom was not persuaded. And then I discovered 3 magic words that really have been much more effective in persuading even that parent. The 3 magic words are General David Petraeus. In case you don't recall the story, David Petraeus graduated top of his class at West Point, first in his class at Fort Leavenworth, brigadier general at age 46, earned a doctorate at Princeton. George W. Bush appointing him commanding general. Barack Obama appointed him director of the CIA. You would think he would know that there is no such thing as privacy to any photo that you share electronically, but somehow he didn't get that memo. He and his mistress, Paula Broadwell, thought, we're so smart, we're so clever, we've got our passwords. Nobody will ever find out. Wrong, career over. What's the moral of the story of David Petraeus and Paula Broadwell? Well, there are a couple morals. One is don't cheat on your spouse. Another is don't share any photo electronically unless you're prepared to see it in the newspaper tomorrow morning, regardless of whether it's a quote-unquote secure site, regardless of passwords, anything can be hacked. That's the message you must teach your child. And you don't teach it by preaching. You don't teach any virtue by preaching. You teach virtue to children by inculcating virtuous habits. By saying, look, I will see every photo you take when you take it. And if I see anything inappropriate, you lose the device. The challenges have changed. 20 years ago, there used to be a public service announcement that would come on in the United States at 10 o'clock on television. It's 10 o'clock, do you know where your kids are? Because 20 years ago, the dangers and the gangs and the alcohol were all out there. And many of us were raised in that era. And we think, well, it's 10 o'clock and I'm home, my kid's home, alone upstairs in the bedroom, so I'm a good parent, right? No. It's not good enough, not anymore. Times have changed. Your daughter may be alone in her bedroom upstairs, but if she's got a smartphone, she could be uploading pornography. Your son could be downloading pornography. She could be engaged in cyberbullying. He could be a victim of cyberbullying. The challenges have changed. You've got to be a parent. And many American parents are really confused. They want to be their kid's best friend. But a friend is a peer. A friend cannot command. A friend cannot say, I will not allow you to pig out on ice cream right before supper. But a parent must say that. A friend can't say, I'm turning off your device so you can get some sleep. But a parent must say that. And only a parent can say that. There's any number of kids out there who can be your kid's best friend. But there is no one else who can be the parent. This is your job. If you're going to give your kid a smartphone, you must install on the phone an app like Mini Mobile, My Mobile Watchdog. And some parents really get it, and they go a little further. One mom did a little quality control. She sent her daughter an anonymous text. Hey, hot stuff, I'm new in town. Will you send me some pictures? Daughter responded, no, I know this is your mom, please stop. Proud of you, honey, keep making good choices. Love, Mom. So what really matters? What should our first priority be as parents? Well, until recently that would have been a guess or a matter of opinion, but we now have good longitudinal cohort studies that really give us evidence-based answers. What should our top priority be as parents? Longitudinal cohort studies in which researchers recruited a large number of kids early in life, followed them throughout childhood, through adolescence, into adulthood. These studies allow us to answer the question, what characteristic in the child that I can change best predicts good outcomes in adulthood? Good outcomes. What do I mean by good outcomes? Well, having a job, if you want a job, being in good health, not being addicted to drugs or alcohol, not being convicted of a felony. Researchers look at all these outcomes. They find that what kind of grades you're getting in school accounts for very little of the variance. virtue and character predict good outcomes and predict it powerfully. Character, meaning, among other things, self-control, is measured in childhood. How do you measure self-control in a 12-year-old? You don't talk to the 12-year-old, you talk to the classmates and to the teachers. You say, can this kid take turns? Can this kid listen to the grown-ups and to the peers? Low self-control measured at age 12 predicts a high risk of drug and alcohol use in that individual 20 years down the road. High self-control measured at age 12 predicts a low risk of drug and alcohol use 20 years down the road. Low self-control measured at 12 years of age predicts a high risk of financial struggles, whether reported by the individual or by a neighbor. High self-control at age 12 predicts a low risk of financial struggles, whether reported by the individual or by the neighbor. Low self-control at age 12 predicts a low credit score in that individual 20 years down the road. High self-control at age 12 predicts a high credit score. So what should our first priority be? What really matters? Teaching virtue and character. That's not a sermon. It is a robust empirical finding. I devote 2 chapters of The Collapse of Parenting to reviewing every relevant cohort, longitudinal cohort study published. And every one of them comes to the same conclusion. Virtue and character predict good outcomes, and it predicts it powerfully. And the funny thing is that American parents used to teach that to kids. American parents used to say things like, hey, I'd rather you get a C on the test honestly than cheat and get an A. But it's now common to find parents saying things like, hey, you want to get into Harvard? You're not just competing against American kids anymore. You're competing against kids from Europe and Asia. You got to have incredible grades. And there has been an explosion in cheating over the last 20 years, which I document, and a change in the character of cheating. 20 years ago, the kid who cheated at school was usually at the lower end of the academic spectrum. Not anymore. Today, the kid who is the top student is just as likely or more likely to be cheating than the kid at the lower end of the spectrum. Because you gotta have perfect marks. Dr. James Heckman, Nobel Prize winner, has worked with one of these longitudinal cohort studies for 40 years, from the time they enrolled infants to the last wave of follow-up when the infants were now 38 years old. He's worked with this study for 40 years. And he has found that grades and test scores are poor predictors of success in life because they only measure cognitive achievement. Character. Character plays the pivotal role. That's the empirical finding. What parameter, measured when a child at 12 years of age, powerfully predicts health and wealth and happiness in that individual 20 years later? It is self-control and other measures of conscientiousness like honesty. I'm not saying the other 4 don't matter. I'm saying that they do not predict health and wealth and happiness down the road. Psychologists have known for many years that every human personality can be mapped on a 5-dimensional space. The 5 dimensions of human personality are conscientiousness and its subtraits of self-control and honesty, openness to new ideas, friendliness and agreeableness, emotional stability, and extroversion, introversion. Some dimensions of human personality are not easily changed, notably extroversion, introversion. And personality does become more fixed as we age, but even young adults can change significantly on some traits. And it turns out that self-control is very amenable to change. It is not innate, it is not hardwired. You teach it. How do you teach self-control to a child? You say, no dessert until you eat your vegetables. No games until all the homework is done and all the chores are done. If that has not been the practice in your household, I encourage you to make it the practice in your household. If that has not been the practice in your household, there will be an explosion. And the older the child, the louder the explosion. But if both parents stand their ground, which is a tremendous challenge when the parents are divorced, but if both parents stand their ground, in 6 weeks, you will have a child who has better self-control. And you will have a happier child and a happier family. I've seen it, the research supports it. So the job of the parent is to teach virtue. It's not a sermon, it's a robust empirical finding. But the problem is that teaching virtue, teaching right and wrong, requires that you teach from a position of authority. If you say, well, I personally wouldn't want to cheat on a test, but that's just my opinion. You do whatever you want. That's not teaching right and wrong. And your kid is free to disregard that. If you're teaching virtue, you must teach from a position of authority. As I said earlier, I have been a medical doctor in the United States for 31 years. I have witnessed firsthand the collapse of American parenting. As recently as 20 years ago, American parents were comfortable saying things like, do unto others. Over the last 20 years, I have seen that command soften, morph into a question. And the question is usually something like, well, how would you feel if someone did that to you? And the parent has no idea what to say when the son responds, if someone did that to me, I'd kick him in the nuts and then I'd sit on his face. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words which I command you this day shall be upon your heart. What does that mean? It's usually translated something like teach them diligently, but that's not even close. It would be easy to say that in Hebrew. The verb would be lamed, to teach. But that's not the verb. The verb is shanan. What does shanan mean? Shanan means to chisel in stone. Better translation, that would be inscribe them, engrave them on the hearts of your children. You find that exegesis in my book, The Collapse of Parenting. In the same chapter, I quote from a column by a regular contributor to the New York Times, Jennifer Finney Boylan. She wrote in her column that enlightened parenting means setting your child free to choose and to discover for themselves their own right and wrong. And if in so doing they become a stranger to you, then so be it. End quote. That may sound enlightened or not, depending on your perspective, but it is not. It is a dereliction of duty. What is childhood for? Quite literally, what is childhood for? I addressed this question in the opening of The Collapse of Parenting. Look, a horse is a mature adult at 4 years of age, and a horse is a bigger animal than a human. A 4-year-old child has only begun. Why? Humans are immature for more years than most mammals live. What's the point? Why is childhood so long? Well, we don't have to guess. We have scholars who've been studying this. And what the researchers tell us is that childhood is as long as it is because it takes that long for parents to teach culture to the child. Human culture is wildly variable. What a child growing up in Kyoto, Japan has to know is utterly different from what a child growing up in Appenzell, Switzerland has to know. Not just language, but courtesy, manners, how you eat, what you eat. It's really different, and it takes a long time to teach. Lengthy childhood is a uniquely human characteristic. And that calmness, saying that enlightened parenting means letting your kid loose to discover for themselves their own right and wrong. If you let your child loose to discover for themselves their own right and wrong, what they will discover is Akon, Eminem, Justin Bieber, Miley Cyrus, mainstream pornography. That is a dereliction of duty. The choice of school is arguably the most consequential decision in the life of a child. The choice of school influences the child's attitude toward every content area more than any other factor over which you have control. For teenagers, the choice of school influences the risk of drug and alcohol use more than any other factor over which you have control. And children are not competent to make this choice, but many parents now function as educational consultants, driving their kids around from one school to another, and then the parent makes a recommendation, but the choice of school is left in the hands of the 12-year-old. Parents say, well, I just wanted to be happy. I just wanted to be happy. I certainly don't want her to go to a girls' school, parents will say. They'll say, look, the real world is co-ed. School should prepare kids for the real world. So school should be co-ed. That's pretty obvious, right? Jacqueline Granlease went to Belfast in Northern Ireland because Northern Ireland, like the Republic of Ireland, has a centuries-old tradition of girls' public schools. Northern Ireland, like the United Kingdom, has a decades-old tradition of letting parents choose among several schools for their child, beginning in middle school. So Jacqueline Granlease, an American investigator, went to Belfast, Northern Ireland. She wanted to study girls attending a girls' public school compared to girls in the same neighborhood attending a co-ed public school. Same religion, same demographic. And she asked every student, are you a good student? You good at sport? Are you pretty? She found that for girls attending the co-ed school, you only need to ask one question to know the girl's self-concept and self-efficacy. And that one question is, are you pretty? If you're attending a co-ed school and the boys think you're pretty, you are royalty. You walk towards the front door, the boys rush to open the door for you. The other girls see that. It raises your status in the eyes of the other girls. Doesn't matter if you're no good at sport. Doesn't matter if you get lousy grades. If the boys think you're pretty, you're really special. What if the boys don't think you're pretty? If you're walking down the hall and a boy says, oh, it's such a whale, your face looks like a pizza. And some boys talk like that. Not all boys are gentlemen. Translation of what he said, you're overweight and you have acne. You don't care what that boy says. You loathe and detest that boy. But when the other girls see how the boy disrespects you, it lowers your status in the eyes of the other girls. What about at the girls' school? Are you a good student? Good. That was associated with higher self-concept and higher self-efficacy at the girls' school, which was not true at the co-ed school. Are you good at sport? Good. That was associated with higher self-concept and higher self-efficacy at the girls' school, which was not true at the co-ed school. Are you pretty? Great. That was also associated with higher self-concept at the girls' school, but it wasn't one of the most powerful predictors. It wasn't even one of the top three. What really mattered at the girls' school was, are you a good friend? Do you keep your promises? You can make a good case that girls' schools are much better preparation for the real world than the co-ed school is. Because at the co-ed school for girls, what matters more than anything else is whether or not you are considered pretty. And you know what? In the real world, it's a little different. To illustrate that, I want you to try to imagine, I know this will be difficult, try to imagine that I look like Brad Pitt. I know, don't laugh too hard. Try to imagine that I was much better looking than I actually am. Well, how would that affect my work as a family doctor? I don't think it would affect it very much. If I showed up for work 3 hours late, if I made the wrong diagnosis and wrote the wrong prescriptions, people would say, well, he looks like Brad Pitt, but he's a total idiot! In most jobs, whether or not you are competent is more important than whether or not you're cute. There are a few exceptions, like model, actress, and prostitute, but those jobs don't last real long. Avshalom Caspi, who was at the University of Wisconsin, he's now at Duke, went to Dunedin on the South Island of New Zealand for the same reason that Jacqueline Granlease went to Belfast, Northern Ireland. Dunedin has girls' public schools and co-ed public schools. And it turns out that the girls attending the girls' public schools do not differ from girls attending the co-ed public schools in race, ethnicity, religion, religiosity, or family composition, or any demographic. He found that girls attending the girls' schools are much less likely to use drugs or alcohol compared to girls at the co-ed public school. And the difference gets bigger as a function of age. At age 12, very few of the girls are drinking. By age 17, many of the girls at the co-ed school are drinking, but very few of the girls at the girls' school. Look, the co-ed school is nothing like the adult world. At a co-ed school, if a girl gets totally wasted and throws up all over the front steps, the boys will say, "Wow, did you hear what Stephanie did? She threw up all over the front steps, excellent." Yeah, but you know, if you're working at Goldman Sachs and you throw up all over the office, they might not be so impressed. What is cool in the eyes of 15-year-old boys is different from what works in the workplace. The co-ed school is nothing like the real world. The real world is co-ed. That's a true statement. Schools should prepare kids for the real world. That's a true statement. Therefore, schools should be co-ed does not follow. It's a fallacy. Based, first of all, on the false assumption that the co-ed school resembles the real world. The co-ed school is nothing like the real world. In the co-ed school, all your classmates are your age, plus or minus 1 year, and no one's married. Everyone is a potential romantic partner. Where I work, one of my co-workers is 15 years older than me and listens to Frank Sinatra. Another is 30 years younger than me and listens to Lady Gaga. And the thought of intimacy with any of them is really unpleasant. I don't want to go there. But in the co-ed school, everyone is a potential romantic partner. And for 15-year-olds, sexual intimacy, romantic intimacy is new. It's novel. They've never done it before. And it's common to find kids in that age group who confuse sexuality with spirituality. It's common to find a 15-year-old boy who says, "If only she would be my girlfriend, I would be so happy." 15-year-old girl says, "If only he was my boyfriend, I'd be so happy." It's a characteristic of 15-year-olds to think that they can find ultimate happiness and meaning in a romantic relationship. Well, grown-ups know better. Again, a grown-up means a woman over 22, a man over 30. Grown-ups know that you cannot find your ultimate meaning in a romantic relationship. It's an important part of life. It's a very important part of life. But it can't be your spiritual center. But for 15-year-olds don't know that. And that's one of the charms of adolescence, that they attach such significance to romance. And for girls, it's all about how you look and whether or not the boys think you're cute. You're cute. I was in a 7th grade classroom, and a 13-year-old girl was sitting next to a 13-year-old boy. The 13-year-old girl could easily have passed for a 16-year-old girl. She completed the process of puberty. The 13-year-old boy could easily pass for a 9-year-old boy. He'd not yet begun the process of puberty. And the teacher had assigned all the kids to do a little public speaking exercise. Just before they left for the winter break, she told them, when you come back, I want you to be prepared to speak in front of the class for at least 2 minutes, but not more than 3 minutes, about something that happened to you over the winter break. So first week of January, they're back in school, this girl gets up and she talks about how she went to the mall, and these 2 high school boys started following her around, trying to flirt with her, but she got really creeped out, so she went over to the security guard and the boys went away. Very good, thank you. You may sit down. Then the boy gets up and he talks about how he's really excited about the next Star Wars movie because he is in tune with the dark side of the Force. All right, between this girl and this boy, there can be no meaningful conversation. She is a young woman concerned about sexual harassment. He's a little boy playing with lightsabers. This is nothing like the real world. In the real world, everyone has completed the process of puberty. And unless you have a major psychiatric disorder, you don't spend all your time thinking about sex. But for 15-year-olds in a co-ed classroom, of course the big question is whether or not Emily likes Justin. it would be unreasonable to expect it to be otherwise. Why should they care about Spanish grammar? I'm going to skip this last one in the interest of time, and I'm going to skip this in the interest of time. Let's just jump to this slide. Let's think about women who have been pioneers, women who have done things that no American woman ever did before them. Let's see, Madeleine Albright, first woman to be Secretary of State. Condoleezza Rice, first woman to be National Security Advisor, second woman to be Secretary of State. Nancy Pelosi, the only woman to be Speaker of the House. Susan Rice, Ambassador to the United Nations. Bernadette Healy, the first woman to lead the National Institutes of Health. Drew Gilpin-Faust, the only woman to lead Harvard. Sally Ride, the first American woman to fly in space. Rosa Parks. What do all these women have in common? They are all graduates of girls' schools. Most Americans don't know that. And we could go on and on. Georgia O'Keeffe, Judy Blume, Reese Witherspoon, Jane Fonda, Tia Leone. It's astonishing. Fewer than 1% of American women have graduated from girls' high schools. But when you look at women who have been pioneers, who have done things no woman has done before them, women who graduate from girls' high schools are wildly overrepresented. Cornelius Reardon, looking nationwide in this country, has found that women who graduate from girls' high schools are 10 times more likely to run for public office than girls from the same neighborhood attending co-ed schools. Girls' schools give girls a voice. Reese Witherspoon was asked by a reporter for Teen Vogue, to what do you credit your success? And she said, well, my school, Harpeth Hall, girls' school in Nashville, Tennessee. And the reporter said, oh, did they have like a really good drama program? She said, no. So why do you give them the credit? She said, well, let me tell you how things work in Hollywood. I heard about a film going into production, and I knew that the lead role would be great for me. I'd be a perfect fit. So I called up my agent and said, hey, you heard about this movie they're going to be making. Would you talk to the director and see if I can read for that part? And 2 days later, that agent calls back and said, Reese, I'm so sorry. I spoke to the director and the producer, and they've really casted that role. They don't have a contract yet, but they know who they want, and she's agreed to do it. So they don't want to do any more reading or auditions. And Reese Witherspoon said, I know what I would have done before I went to Harpeth Hall, because she was an actress in her childhood as well. She said, I would have said thank you and hung up the phone and cried for a day. She said, but after I went to Harpeth Hall, I had a whole different approach. So she goes to the director's home and rings the doorbell. And the housekeeper answers. And Reese Witherspoon says, is so-and-so home? And the housekeeper says, do you have an appointment? And Reese Witherspoon says, thank you very much, because now you've told me he's here. She barges in, past the protesting housekeeper, and starts calling out the director's name. And the director comes out of his study and says, Reese Witherspoon, what are you doing here? And she is in character. She's in character in the role that she wants. She says, oh, Mr. Director, I'm just telling you that movie you're getting ready to make, now that's a Southern movie. You want a Southern girl for that role. You hear what I'm saying to you now. You don't want no Yankee in that role. And she got the part. She took it away from the other woman when she got the part. She said, that's how you succeed in Hollywood. You don't wait to be asked. You find your voice. And she credits Harpeth Hall, a girls' school, for helping her find her voice. This is the trajectory of brain development in girls and boys as a function of age and years. The arrow indicates the inflection point. It's the world's largest study of brain development in children at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. Girls reach a halfway point in brain development at about age 11. Boys not until age 15. That's more than 2 standard deviations of difference separating girls from boys. Girls at co-ed schools often dumb themselves down. Girls mature earlier than boys. And the 8th grade boys are telling fart jokes. And most of the 8th grade girls don't find this very funny. But if you want to be popular at a co-ed school, you want the boys to like you. So you dumb yourself down. You laugh at the boys' jokes. You pretend that they're funny in order to raise your status. And you will find some girls do this. C.S. Lewis, in his book, The Magician's Nephew, wrote, "The trouble about trying to make yourself stupider than you really are is that you very often succeed." One of the great dangers of the co-ed school for girls is that some girls want to please the boys, laugh at the boys' jokes, dumb themselves down. Your job as a parent is to teach virtue. Well, which virtue? Humility, I think, is the most important virtue for American parents to teach. I devote a chapter of the book, The Collapse of Parenting, to defend that statement, because Americans are so confused, and the kids are confused, because they're immersed in a culture that's all about walking tall and standing proud. And I was at another school, and I asked the kids, what does humility mean? And the boy said, humility means trying to convince yourself you're dumb when you know you're smart. I said, actually, that's not humility, that's psychosis, okay? It's a willful detachment from reality. I said, humility means being as interested in other people as you are in yourself. And the kids are giving me a blank look. They'd never heard this before, and how should they? They live in the United States. They've received no instruction. American culture, all about walking tall, standing proud. But the book of Micah in the Old Testament, the prophet asks, what does the Lord require you? You got to dot all the I's and cross all the T's? He says, no. Here's what the Lord requires. Asot mishpat v'ahavat chesed v'atznei lechet im Elohecha. To do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with your God. And the kids are confused, and the parents are confused. So I was doing another version of this talk for parents, and a mother said, I don't want my daughter to be humble. I want her to have high self-esteem. So when that big job comes along, she'll go for it. She'll apply for it. I said, okay, you're a little confused here. You're confusing being humble with being timid. It's not the same thing. They're almost opposites. And the virtue you're thinking of is not self-esteem. Self-esteem is not a virtue. The virtue you're thinking of is called courage. Courage. You want your daughter to have courage. Courage means you know the risk and you find the strength to push forward anyhow. Bloated self-esteem often means overestimating your own significance. And we have good longitudinal cohort studies now showing that bloated self-esteem leads to disappointment and to resentment. If I'm so awesome, how come I'm not rich and famous? Humility leads to wisdom. But you know what your problem is? Your problem is that you live in the United States. I took this photograph in Times Square. Pepsi slogan, live for now. Don't worry about the sugar, live for now. If it feels good, do it. Live for now, whatever floats your boat. That is now contemporary American culture. It didn't used to be, but it is now. The real hazard of American culture right now, the culture of Instagram, Katy Perry, Lady Gaga, Miley Cyrus, if it feels good, do it, is that it undermines self-control, undermines humility, and disrespects parents. So what do you do about it? You've got to bridge the generations. We started by talking about the bonds broken. You've got to restore the bonds across generations. You've got to fight for supper with your kids. No devices allowed at the table. The benefits of an evening meal with a parent are huge. Frank Elgar and his colleagues went coast to coast, interviewing more than 10,000 adolescents, and asked them, in the last 7 days, how many evening meals have you had at home with a parent? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And then for each of these kids, determine internalizing problems like anxiety and depression, externalizing problems like hitting the wall and anger, positive well-being, pro-social behavior, and life satisfaction, and found a huge effect of having a meal at home with a parent, not just comparing 0 to 7, but at almost every step along the way. Let's compare 5 evening meals a week with 6 evening meals a week, going from 5 to 6. We see a significant decrease in internalizing problems, a significant decrease in externalizing problems, a significant increase in positive well-being, pro-social behavior, and life satisfaction. And yet what has happened? In 1992, researchers asked teens, have you had a meal at home with a parent in the last 24 hours? In 1992, two-thirds of teenagers said, yes, I have. In 2005, two-thirds of teenagers said, no, I haven't. That's a huge change in a very short period of time. You got to fight for every meal at home. And when you're in the car, my wife and I went to the new car dealer for the first time in many years. We were horrified when the dealer wanted to sell us the rear seat entertainment system and handed us this flyer. Let's take a look at the flyer. Two kids are wearing headsets, looking at a screen. Mom is smiling, looking at them as if to say, hey, this is great. We can drive 5 hours, never have to talk to my kids at all. What are we thinking? Time is precious. Time in the car is special. It's private time. It's a great opportunity. You should be listening to her, and she should be listening to you, not to Miley Cyrus or Justin Bieber. No earbuds, no headsets in the car. Beyond the bedroom. Researchers find the typical American family, mother, father, son, and daughter come home, and within 5 minutes, each of the four is in a different room of the house looking at a different screen. You cannot have a family life if the family is not physically together. Beyond the bedroom. The work should be done in the kitchen or family room. I find parents of young kids who are picking up their kid from school, then driving them to a play date, and then driving them to computer coding class, and they're eating in the car on the way from one activity to another. And the unintended message is that relaxed time at home with family is the lowest priority of all. Don't send that message. Cancel the play date. Make a family date instead. Nothing in the bedroom except a bed. I practice what I preach. 9 years ago, I invited my wife's parents to move in with us. My parents had both died. That's my father-in-law, the one with the dumb phone, with his back to the fire. That's Joan, his wife. That's my wife, and there is my daughter. They're not trying to entertain with one another, but they're in the same room together. That's how family life begins. It costs nothing to do this. It used to be common. It is now rare. Prioritize the family. If your kid is scheduled with activities that regularly conflict with supper, family comes first. The unintended message of that overscheduling is that the performance is all that matters. Got to add more activities to have on your resume to show the colleges. And that's the wrong message. Family should not be the lowest priority. Family should be the highest priority. That's what the research is telling us. So many American parents are confused. They think they have to choose between being the tiger mom pushing their kid to achieve or the Irish setter dad who just wants to let kids do whatever they want. Both are mistaken. Last chapter of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, is titled The Meaning of Life. What I mean there is that you must teach your child your understanding of the big picture. What's it for? What's the point? And getting into Harvard is not good enough. It's not an answer. If it's just about getting into a highly selective school, then pushing kids to achieve becomes a race to nowhere, to borrow the title of a documentary making that point. You've got to give your child a sense of what life is for. That's about more than what college you go to, how much money you earn. Because without that meaning, there is no point. And working hard just leads to anxiety, depression, and disengagement. But it doesn't make any sense to be the Irish setter dad and let kids do whatever they desire unless you have first educated desire. Instill a longing for something better than video games and social media. We began with the question, why are American kids today so much more likely to be anxious or depressed or disengaged compared to American kids just 10 years ago? And what can we do about it? Here are my answers. Parents have allowed relations with same-age peers to displace the family, but you can change that. Parents have allowed social media to displace real-world experience, but you can change that. American parents have largely failed, are largely failing to teach virtue and character with authority, but you can change that in your own home. Again, you'll find much more about all these issues in my books, Why Gender Matters, Voice Adrift, but tonight's talk especially drawn from Girls on the Edge and the Collapse of Parenting Again, the handout is online, leonardsax.com/montrose.pdf. Ellen, do we have time for a few questions? Okay. Your comments, questions, stories you'd like to share about anything we talked about this evening? Yes, way in the back.
How is your presentation different in an international setting? I know you've done this all.
Okay, that's a great question. How is my presentation different when I speak in England or Scotland or Australia or New Zealand? There I will warn parents about the dangers of American culture. You get off the airplane, it's 13 hours from Los Angeles to Sydney. And you get off the airplane and you go to the bookstore and what do you see? You see Brad and Angelina. You cannot escape Brad and Angelina anywhere on the planet. American culture has become pervasive. And I will warn parents about limiting American culture. And when I speak in Australia, New Zealand, England, Scotland, I talk about strengthening ties with other Commonwealth nations, talk about the Duke of Edinburgh program, and things that those parents can do to connect to other parents in the Commonwealth and stay away at all costs from the United States. So it's great fun, and the parents get a kick because I'm American, and to them it seems ironic. I should tell you incidentally that the title of this book, the title of the manuscript I sent to the publisher was The Collapse of American Parenting. And the subtitle was Why Most Kids Would Now Be Better Off Raised Outside the United States. But non-celebrity authors don't get to choose their titles. And my publisher said, no, that's not going to be a title. Worried that might hurt sales. So that's not the title. But it's quite different depending on where I am. But I am absolutely, so Canada is kind of the most interesting case. I've done a great many talks in Canada. I was just in Calgary a week ago, which was a very unusual experience. Turns out the province has issued new guidelines prohibiting teachers from using the phrase boys and girls, or girls and boys. Teachers in Calgary, teachers in the province of Alberta are now instructed, you're not to say girls and boys, don't forget to bring in your work. You're to say everybody, don't forget to bring in your work. So anyhow, every place is different, but in Alberta and across Canada, I warn parents that Canada is drifting toward the United States. And that's not a good thing. But anyhow, we could go on and on about that. If you're interested, come on up and we'll talk more afterwards. But if you're not going to Canada a lot, that might not interest you. Comments, other comments, questions about anything we talked about this evening? Yes?
Can you give another example when you spoke about breaking the bonds across generations, specifically how to bridge those again and what can be done?
Wonderful. So the question is, I talked about restoring bonds across generation, and your colleague is asking for another suggestion. Okay, vacation. Choose a vacation that strengthens bonds across generations. That means an outdoor vacation. That means no devices. So call the ski lodge and say, hey, do you folks have really good wireless internet access? You do? Okay, sorry, we're going somewhere else. The word you're looking for is unplugged vacation. Unplugged vacation. There are many opportunities as you get up into Vermont and New Hampshire where there's no internet access, and that's great. That's what you're looking for. And when your daughter asks if she's allowed to bring along her best friend on the ski trip, the answer is no. Because it's got to be you and her on the chairlift. Dangling the chairlift 50 feet up when the power stops is a great opportunity to have a conversation. And if her best friend comes along, it's going to be her and her friend on the chairlift. And all you've done is finance a very expensive play date. The vacation is you and your kids. The point of the vacation is to strengthen the bonds between you and your kids. Choose an unplugged vacation. And another point, I just can't stress enough the importance of being physically together at home. So my daughter, one of the things I'm not crazy about her school is that they require so much homework to be done online. So she's in the kitchen on her laptop doing her homework, And I'm right there at the kitchen table with her, but I'm not helping her with her homework. I'm answering my own emails. And she started whistling the Bach Little Fugue. And then I came in on the second voice, and my wife, who was in the kitchen, came in on the third voice, and we kind of muddled through it, sort of. And it was a great little family moment, but no words were spoken. No devices in the bedroom. Be with your child as much as possible, physically with your child, and plan unplugged vacations. Yes, in the back.
At what age does the net nanny come off the phone?
Okay, at what age does the net nanny come off the phone? That was a very polite version of the question. The more common version of that same question is the parent will say, look, my daughter's going off to university next year, and I'm not going to be there to supervise how she uses her phone. So what is the point of me trying to enforce this virtuous behavior, whatever that's supposed to mean, when she's going to be away? And she won't be, maybe she's going to rebound. If I push her to be so virtuous, maybe she'll rebound when she goes away. So in the book of Proverbs, there's a line, if you raise up a child in the way they should go, when they are old, they will not depart from it. All right, well, what does the research have to say about that? Is that a true statement? The research, I think we'd have to say that line from the book of Proverbs is not accurate. It's too optimistic. There are no guarantees. But we could restate that line from the book of Proverbs in a way that would bring it in line with the research. We would restate it as follows. If you raise up a child in the way they should go, then when they go off to university, you have improved the odds. If your child has not gotten in the habit of spending hours a day on social media, if your son has not gotten in the habit of spending hours a day on video games and pornography, you've improved the odds that when he goes or she goes to university, they will retain those virtuous habits. On the other hand, if your daughter's gotten in the habit of spending hours a day on social media, your son's gotten in the habit of spending hours a day on video games and pornography, what's the odds that when they go away to university, they'll say, oh, well, now that I find myself at university, I will turn over a new leaf and become more virtuous, even as I observe my peers engaging in wanton behavior. It's not very good. Your question was specifically, at what age? My answer is, as long as they are living at home. As long as they are living in your home, the net nanny should stay on the phone. If they want to live independently and pay their own way, that's great. Yes?
So, if self-control is so important,
Mm-hmm.
does one not require freedom to develop self-control?
Right.
And where are you giving them freedom? I mean, I have my kids' passcodes, and they know at any point I can dive in and check things out. But I don't have a net nanny on them. And
Okay.
I have dived in, and I have found things that we discussed, but I keep encouraging them to make their decisions, be the wise ones. And so I'm there to, redirect, but I'm not looking at every single picture that they're posting, and I'm not listening to every word that they're sharing with their friends.
All right. I want to pull up a different presentation here in order to answer your question. Because, indeed, many parents will make that comment. They'll say, look, for a kid to learn self-control, they have to have the option of making the wrong decision. And I love to tell the story that Meg Meeker shared with me. I'm a huge fan of Meg Meeker. I'm sure that's a familiar name to some of you. Let's see, this would be San Diego parents right here. Meg Meeker and I were on the Today Show together, and that was nothing special. What was really great about that, though, was the opportunity to spend an hour and a half talking with Dr. Meeker. And she told me a story that I think is very relevant to what you are saying. Pull this up here. Here it is. She told him about her son, Walter. She's 4 kids, 3 daughters, the youngest, Walter. And she told Walter, her son, you're not playing video games. None. Not now, not ever. And this was a constant point of tension throughout adolescence, because he was like, are you totally crazy? This is what American boys do. I'm not even allowed to go to other boys' houses because they might play video games. You're being totally unrealistic. So he's working part-time jobs, and he turns 18, and he says to his mom, hey, I got money I earned. I'm going to go out and buy an Xbox and Call of Duty. She was like, fine. So he goes off to college, and toward the end of his first year at college, he called Mom up and said, hey Mom, I just got $400. Guess how I did it? And she said, I have no idea. He said, I sold my Xbox and all my games. He said, you know, it's really something. There's all these guys at college who expect you to be really impressed that you can kill 8 aliens in 10 seconds in Halo. And I'm like, dude, you can't even talk to girls. The human brain is very plastic at 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years of age. And as a professional, one of my big interests has been in addictions. The younger a child gets addicted, the harder it is for them to quit. If you start smoking a pack a day when you're 23, you'll be able to quit. If you start smoking a pack a day when you're 12, the odds are very poor that you will ever quit. Some of these boys start playing video games at 11, 12, 13. They get addicted, and it's hard for them to quit. And they don't even see the point. There's nothing they'd rather do than play video games. By making him wait till age 18, she's giving him the freedom to decide for himself. He played the game, he decided after a year, I don't really need this. This is not for me. But your question is specifically about Net Nanny and the phone. And looking at the phone, checking the phone, having the passwords, making sure there's nothing inappropriate. I think it's very instructive to consider what happened in Canyon City. Next week I'll be flying out to Denver again to speak at a school there. Flying to Denver, drive south to Colorado Springs, make a right turn, drive west to Canyon City. Beautiful resort town, lovely little town, everybody knows everybody, tight-knit, family-oriented community. Canyon City High School, more than 100 students at Canyon City High School were discovered to be exchanging obscene photos that they had taken of themselves and sending to their peers. They were using a Vault app. You look at the phone, you look at your kid's phone, and you see a calculator. You tap on the calculator. It works like a 4-function calculator. You can add, subtract, multiply, and divide. If you enter a 4-digit passcode or 5-digit passcode, the calculator vanishes, and you find a vault of obscene photos. If the parent had installed Net Nanny or My Mobile Watchdog, they would have known these photos were there. Simply looking at your kid's phone is not sufficient. There is an arms race going on here. And parents who think they know what their kids are doing because they looked at their kid's phone are mistaken. No parent in Canyon City had installed Net Nanny or My Mobile Watchdog. Many parents were looking at their kid's phone and had seen the new calculator app, and they were all fooled. Looking at your kid's phone is not sufficient. Having your kid's password is not sufficient. You don't know that this is a Vault app. There's no way you could know just by looking at the phone. You have to have an app that's showing you how the phone is being used, not simply looking at the phone. Because many apps out there are now designed to fool you. The apps are designed to fool the parents. They look like one thing and they are something else. You are living in 2007 if you think that looking at the phone is sufficient. The technology has evolved very rapidly. All the popular kids were doing it, led by the football players. The principal announced his resignation, which made no sense to me. The kids were exchanging these photos on weekends in the privacy of their bedroom. The school has no jurisdiction over what kids do in their bedroom, but the parents refuse to accept responsibility. The parents refuse to recognize this is not the principal's fault, this is the parents' fault. Looking at the phone is not sufficient. The district attorney then had to decide whether to bring criminal charges against these children. If you are 16 years old and you take a photo, an obscene photo of yourself, and send it to your 16-year-old friend, you have produced and distributed child pornography. That is a Class 3 felony, punishable by up to 6 years in prison, and requiring that you register for the next 20 years as a convicted sex offender. That is not quite clean when you turn 18. Don't put your child in this situation. If any one of those parents had installed Net Nanny or My Mobile Watchdog, they would have nipped this in the bud very early. But many, many parents saying, oh, I'm looking at my kid's phone. It's unlocked, I can see all the apps, everything looks fine. It is common for American kids to have two galleries, one that you know about, the other that you don't know about. Vault apps are very pervasive now. They didn't exist 10 years ago. You need some help. You need to be a little humble and recognize that you cannot do this by yourself. You need people who understand the technology and who know what kids are doing and who know how to monitor it. Teaching self-control is all about inculcating virtuous habits. But you don't want to put your child at risk. You wouldn't put your child in front of at the wheel of a car with no driver ed. You must recognize your child is immersed in a toxic culture that is pushing kids to do bad things. You have to help them. You have to guide them. You have to inculcate virtuous habits. So that's my argument. It's past my bedtime, so I think we should probably